A rancher heard her cry. The Apache woman was trapped in a cruel stocks. The air was still, except for the distant whisper of the wind moving across the dry grass and dusty trails. John, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, was already awake, as he usually was at this hour. Years of ranching had taught him that the early morning hours were the best for checking on his cattle and ensuring everything on the ranch was in order. The land was his life, and he knew every hill, every creek, and every worn path as if they were etched into his memory. John moved quietly around his ranch, stepping over loose stones and watching the cattle graze. The world seemed peaceful, the kind of peace that came from isolation and hard work. He liked it that way. He liked the quiet. It gave him time to think, to plan his day, and sometimes to feel a rare sense of calm in a world that often felt chaotic and harsh. But on this particular morning, the calm was interrupted by a sound that made him freeze in place. At first, he wasn't sure what it was. The wind played tricks on the ears out here, carrying the faint sounds of animals, distant creaks of trees, and sometimes even strange echoes from the hills. But this sound was different. It was sharp, sudden, and full of pain, a human cry. It was a low, desperate wail that seemed to carry a story of fear and suffering across the empty desert. John's heart tightened. He had heard many sounds in his life, but nothing like this. Something deep inside him told him that someone was in trouble, and the thought of ignoring it was impossible. He paused, listening carefully. The cry came again, slightly louder this time, cutting through the morning air. John knew he couldn't stay where he was. Whoever it was, they needed help. Without hesitation, he grabbed his wide-brimmed hat to shield his face from the rising sun and walked toward the sound, his boots crunching over the dry earth. Every step brought him closer to the unknown, and though he felt a flicker of worry, he also felt a sense of duty, the same duty that had guided him through storms, wildfires, and other dangers over the years. The cry became clearer as he walked. It was faint but unmistakably human. John's mind raced with possibilities. Who could it be? Was it someone lost? Was it an accident? Or worse, had someone been hurt on purpose? He had heard stories in nearby towns of people being attacked or captured, but he had never imagined he would stumble across something like that on his own ranch. Yet the urgency in the sound pushed him forward, and he moved with careful determination, scanning the desert landscape as he went. The desert here was unforgiving. The ground was uneven, filled with rocks, thorny bushes, and scattered debris. Cacti stood like silent sentinels, their shadows long in the early morning light. The sun rose steadily, casting its warm glow but also highlighting the harshness of the terrain. John's eyes were sharp, trained from years of working in the wild, and soon he noticed something unusual near a dry creek bed. There, half hidden among the rocks and low bushes, was a crude wooden structure, heavy, rough, and threatening in appearance, and from it came the cry. As he approached, the figure of a woman came into view. She was small and thin, her hair dark and tangled, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her wrists were trapped in the wooden stocks, and the cruel device held her in place with tight, unyielding pressure. The sight made John's stomach tighten. The woman's eyes met his, wide and filled with fear, and she trembled as if expecting him to be another threat. Her body was bent awkwardly, and every movement seemed to bring her pain. The sound she made now was no longer just a cry. It was a plea for help, desperate and urgent. John's first instinct was to stay calm. He knew that sudden movements or loud noises could frighten her even more. He spoke softly, his voice low and steady, hoping to reassure her without alarming her. "It's okay. I'm here to help. You're safe now," he said, though he could see that she barely understood. Her lips quivered and she tried to speak, but her voice was broken by fear and exhaustion. Still, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a small spark that told John she knew he meant no harm. Examining the stocks, John could see how cruelly they were made. Rough wood pressed against her wrists, causing bruises and swelling. The structure had clearly been left in place for hours, maybe even longer, and it was designed not just to trap, but to punish. John's anger rose at the thought that someone could treat another human being this way. But there was no time for anger now. The woman needed immediate help, and he would not waste a moment. Carefully, John set down his hat and started loosening the wooden stocks. It was not an easy task. The wood was old but strong, bound with crude nails that resisted his tools. He worked slowly, talking to the woman in quiet words, trying to calm her trembling hands. Almost there. Just a little more, he said, moving each piece with care so as not to hurt her further. Her eyes followed every movement, her breathing shallow but steadying slightly. She could not yet speak, but the tension in her body began to ease as she sensed that someone was finally on her side. As he freed her left wrist, she gave a small, almost inaudible sigh of relief. John smiled gently, encouraging her. He worked on the other wrist with equal care, finally freeing her from the cruel device that had held her captive. The woman collapsed slightly forward, exhausted, and John caught her, supporting her weight. She rested against him for a moment, her tears wetting his shirt, her body trembling with fatigue and fear. John did not rush. He let her rest, letting her know through his presence that she was no longer alone, that the desert was not a place of danger for her now. When she regained a little strength, John offered her water from his canteen. She drank slowly, hesitating at first, but then with a growing sense of trust. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her throat had been parched from hours of crying and struggle. The cool water seemed to revive her slightly, giving her enough energy to begin moving. John helped her stand, his hands steady on her back, guiding her away from the cruel wooden trap that had imprisoned her. Each step was careful, measured, and he noticed that every movement still brought her pain. But she did not give up. She followed him with a determination born from sheer will to survive. As they moved away from the stocks, John took in more of the woman's appearance. Her clothing was torn and dusty, and her shoes were worn from walking on the harsh terrain. There were faint bruises on her arms and shoulders, signs that she had struggled and suffered before he had found her. Despite all this, there was something remarkable about her, a quiet strength in her eyes, a resilience that spoke of someone who had endured much but was not yet defeated. John felt a deep respect for her courage, and he silently promised that he would do everything he could to help her reach safety. The desert seemed to watch them in silence as they walked. Birds stirred in the trees, and the wind continued to move across the open land. But the sense of danger that had lingered with the woman seemed to fade slightly with each step. John spoke occasionally, telling her about the ranch, about the cattle, and about simple things that might distract her from fear. His voice was calm, grounding, and she began to relax just enough to focus on each step rather than the terror of the past hours. By the time they reached a small, shaded area near a creek, the first rays of sunlight had fully illuminated the land. The woman finally looked around, taking in her surroundings with careful curiosity. She had been trapped and isolated for so long that the openness of the desert now felt both strange and freeing. John helped her sit on a rock and covered her with a thick blanket he had brought. He knew that warmth and comfort would be just as important as food and water in helping her feel safe again. As the morning progressed, the woman began to speak in quiet whispers, telling John her name and a little about herself. Her voice was soft, fragile, and hesitant, but it was the first sign that she was beginning to trust him. John listened patiently, never interrupting, giving her the space to share only what she felt safe enough to say. Even though her story was fragmented, John could see the outline of a life filled with hardship, courage, and a desire to survive. The details were vague, but the emotion behind her words was clear. She had suffered greatly, and now, for the first time in a long time, she felt that someone cared. By mid-morning, John had made a small camp near the creek, enough to provide shelter and safety until they could travel further. The rancher sat beside her, keeping a careful watch, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He knew that this day would change both their lives. The desert was vast and the dangers were real, but in that moment there was hope that the woman would survive, hope that justice might one day follow, and hope that even in the harshest circumstances, human kindness could still shine through. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow across the rugged desert landscape. The gentle rustling of leaves in the sparse trees and the distant call of birds were the only sounds besides the soft burbling of the nearby creek. The woman, still wrapped in the blanket John had given her, sat quietly on a large rock, her eyes reflecting both fear and uncertainty. Every movement of the blanket over her arms reminded her of the cruel wooden stocks she had been trapped in just hours before, and a shiver ran through her body. She had never felt such helplessness in her life, and though the immediate danger had passed, the memory of it lingered painfully. John sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. He could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands trembled slightly whenever she tried to move them. He understood that trust could not be forced, especially after what she had endured. For now, he focused on providing simple comforts, water, a safe place to rest, and the reassurance of his presence. He did not ask her to speak, only to sit and breathe, letting her know that he was there and that she was no longer alone. After some time, the woman spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words were broken, hesitant, but John listened intently. She told him fragments of her story, enough for him to understand that she was an Apache woman who had been captured by unknown men, possibly as part of a conflict that had been troubling her community. She had been separated from her family and forced into the cruel stocks, left to suffer alone. She did not know why she had been targeted, and fear made her cautious about sharing too much. John nodded gently, letting her speak at her own pace, understanding that her silence held as much meaning as her words. As the hours passed, the woman began to relax slightly, realizing that John was patient and would not rush her. He offered her some food, simple bread and dried meat from his provisions, and she accepted it, though cautiously. Her hands shook as she ate, and John noticed that she had not eaten properly for a long time. Each bite seemed to restore a little of her strength, and with it, a little of her spirit. He continued to speak softly, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the quiet life he led there. The mundane details of his daily life seemed to soothe her, providing a temporary distraction from the fear and pain she had endured. John also took the time to examine her injuries more closely. Her wrists were still swollen and bruised from the stocks, and her arms bore faint cuts and scratches. Her face showed signs of fatigue and dehydration, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He made careful notes in his mind about what she would need: medical attention, rest, and above all, safety. He could not help but feel anger and sadness that someone could treat another human being so cruelly. But he pushed those feelings aside for now, focusing on the immediate task, helping her heal and regain her strength. As the sun reached its peak, the woman began to speak a little more freely. She described the morning she had been captured, the way she had struggled against her captors, and the hopelessness of being left in the stocks. Her voice trembled as she recounted the fear she had felt, and John could see tears welling in her eyes again. He did not interrupt her. He simply listened, his hand resting lightly on hers in a gesture of reassurance. The act of sharing her story seemed to relieve some of her burden, and for the first time since he had found her, she allowed herself to cry openly, knowing that she was safe in his presence. Despite the trauma she had experienced, the woman displayed remarkable resilience. John noticed the way she observed her surroundings carefully, how she assessed the terrain, and how she moved cautiously yet purposefully when he helped her stand or adjust her position. Her instincts had kept her alive, and now they were guiding her in this new, safer environment. John respected her strength, knowing that it would play a key role in her recovery. He also recognized that trust had to be built slowly, and he was prepared to be patient, no matter how long it took. The afternoon brought a change in the wind, carrying with it the scent of wild sage and desert flowers. John suggested that they move to a slightly more sheltered area, where the woman could rest more comfortably and be protected from the elements. He helped her walk carefully, supporting her when she faltered and offering gentle encouragement. Every step was a small victory, a sign that she was regaining both her physical strength and her sense of control over her life. The desert, once a place of fear and isolation, was slowly becoming a place of safety and healing, thanks to his care. Along the way, the woman began to ask questions, timidly at first. She inquired about the ranch, the animals, and the nearby town. John answered patiently, telling her about the routines of ranch life, the cattle that roamed freely, and the small community that lived beyond the hills. Her curiosity grew with each answer, and he could see her spirit beginning to lift, even if just slightly. The small interactions, the gentle conversation, and the sense of normalcy all contributed to her healing, helping her feel less like a victim and more like a person regaining her life. By late afternoon, John and the woman had reached a small grove of trees that provided shade and a sense of privacy. He helped her sit on a soft patch of grass, placing the blanket around her shoulders again. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the warmth of the sun on her face and the gentle sound of the creek nearby. For the first time in hours, she felt a measure of peace. John watched her quietly, allowing her to rest while keeping a careful eye on the surrounding area. He knew that danger could still be near, and he remained alert, ready to protect her if necessary. As the evening approached, the woman's voice grew stronger, and she began to share more details about her life. She spoke of her family, her community, and the traditions that were important to her. John listened with genuine interest, asking questions only when appropriate and allowing her to guide the conversation. Each story she shared was a step toward reclaiming her identity, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. John felt honored to witness her courage and resilience, knowing that her ability to speak freely was a testament to the trust that had begun to form between them. The sky shifted into shades of purple and gold as the sun began to set, and the desert was bathed in a warm, soft light. The woman sat quietly, leaning against a tree, feeling the fatigue of the day settle into her bones. John gathered a small firewood pile nearby, intending to prepare a simple meal and provide warmth for the coming night. The act of building the fire, of creating a sense of home in the wilderness, gave both of them a feeling of safety and comfort. The desert, once hostile and unforgiving, now seemed a little less intimidating, a place where kindness and care could exist even in the harshest conditions. As night fell, John helped the woman lie down on a makeshift bed of blankets and soft grass. She closed her eyes, feeling the first genuine sense of rest in what felt like an eternity. He sat nearby, keeping watch and reflecting on the events of the day. The memory of finding her in the cruel stocks was vivid in his mind, and he knew that their journey had only just begun. But he also knew that this day marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of healing, trust, and the possibility of hope. The stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky, casting their gentle light across the land. The woman slept peacefully for the first time in days, her breathing slow and even. John remained vigilant, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in his heart. He had found her, freed her, and offered her safety. It was a small victory in the grand scope of life, but it was significant. The bond between them, fragile yet growing, promised that together they could face the challenges ahead. And as the night deepened, the desert seemed to embrace them, no longer a place of fear, but a place where courage and compassion had found a home, Morning came quietly in the desert, bringing with it a soft golden light that touched the rugged landscape. The cool air of the night had faded, replaced by the warmth of a desert sun rising over the hills. The Apache woman awoke slowly, feeling the stiffness in her muscles and the lingering soreness in her wrists. She rubbed her arms gently, still remembering the cruel wooden stocks that had trapped her. Her heart still beat quickly at the memory, but she also felt a small, growing sense of safety. John was awake as well, sitting nearby and checking his surroundings as he always did. His eyes met hers, and he gave a small, reassuring nod. That silent communication said more than words ever could. She was not alone anymore. After a light breakfast of bread, dried meat, and water, John suggested that they begin moving toward the nearest settlement, a small town several miles away. He explained that there she would be safe, receive proper care, and be able to tell her story to the authorities. The woman nodded cautiously, unsure of what lay ahead, but she trusted John. Every step she had taken with him so far had proven that he meant no harm, and that trust was fragile but growing. She rose slowly, leaning on John's steady arm as they prepared to leave their temporary shelter under the trees. The journey was not easy. The desert stretched endlessly, dotted with dry creeks, rocky outcrops, and thorny bushes. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the land, and the heat was oppressive. The woman had not eaten well in days, and the rough terrain made each step a challenge. John kept a careful eye on her, offering support whenever she faltered. He spoke softly to distract her from the pain, telling her about the animals on the ranch, the wildflowers that bloomed in hidden places, and the occasional desert creatures they might see along the way. His calm voice and knowledge of the land made the journey feel less daunting, giving her a sense of security she had not felt in a long time. As they walked, the woman began to share more of her story, hesitantly at first. She spoke of her family, a close-knit Apache community living in the hills, and the life she had known before being captured. Her words were broken, halting, and punctuated by pauses when fear crept back into her voice. She described the morning she had been taken, how she had been separated from others, thrown into the stocks, and left alone for hours. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she continued, compelled by a need to release the weight of her experience. John listened silently, never interrupting, letting her speak at her own pace. His steady presence allowed her to speak, and speaking itself became a small part of her healing. The woman's resilience amazed John. Despite the physical pain and the emotional trauma, she moved steadily across the desert, careful with each step but determined to reach safety. Her instincts, honed by years of living in the harsh desert environment, guided her movements. She avoided sharp rocks, kept an eye out for sudden drops, and remained alert to sounds in the distance. John respected her awareness, recognizing that her survival had depended on such attentiveness. He offered guidance only when necessary, letting her make small decisions herself to regain a sense of control over her life. By midday, the sun was blazing overhead, and the heat began to weigh heavily on both of them. John led them to a small shaded area under a large rock formation. There, he helped the woman sit and offered her more water. She drank slowly, her throat dry and parched from the long walk. The shade and the water brought a temporary relief, allowing her to rest for a while before continuing. John took this moment to check her injuries again. Her wrists were still sore and swollen, but the worst of the pressure from the stocks had eased. He made careful notes in his mind about what medical care she would need once they reached the town. While resting, the woman's curiosity began to surface. She asked John about his life, about the ranch, and about the cattle he raised. John answered with simple stories, describing the daily routines, the challenges of managing the ranch, and the small joys he found in caring for the animals. The conversation, though light, helped ease the tension in her mind. It reminded her that there was life beyond fear and suffering, that there were people in the world capable of kindness and patience. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a faint smile, a small acknowledgement that she was not entirely trapped in the darkness of her recent experiences. After resting, they continued their journey. The landscape slowly began to change, from dry, rocky plains to slightly greener patches where small streams nourished the sparse vegetation. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and the occasional rustle in the bushes hinted at the presence of desert animals. The woman observed these changes carefully, sometimes pausing to admire a flower or watch a lizard scurry across the rocks. John noticed these small moments of engagement and felt a quiet satisfaction. Each observation, each small sign of life that captured her attention, was evidence of her spirit returning, of her slowly reclaiming her connection to the world around her. As they walked, the woman began to share more about her community. She spoke of the elders who guided her people, the rituals and traditions that had shaped her life, and the bonds she shared with her family. Her voice grew stronger with each word, and John could see the pride and love she held for her heritage. Even in the midst of her suffering, she retained a deep connection to her identity and roots. John listened with respect, realizing that understanding her past was an essential part of helping her move forward. Her story was not just about victimhood, it was about strength, resilience, and the desire to survive against all odds. The afternoon brought new challenges. The sun was high, and the heat pressed down on them relentlessly. The woman began to slow, her steps becoming labored. John noticed her fatigue and suggested another brief rest. They found a small area of shade near a cluster of boulders where she could sit and recover. He offered her water again and encouraged her to rest her legs. She leaned back against the rocks, closing her eyes, and allowed herself to simply breathe. John sat nearby, keeping watch and speaking softly when she seemed anxious. The rhythm of the desert, the warmth of the sun, and the gentle sound of the creek nearby combined to create a sense of calm, helping her regain the energy needed for the remaining journey. As evening approached, the light of the setting sun painted the desert in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Shadows stretched across the land, and the temperature began to cool slightly. John suggested that they set up a temporary camp for the night, allowing the woman to rest fully before continuing toward the town in the morning. Together, they gathered small branches and dry grass to create a comfortable sleeping area. John built a small fire to provide warmth and light, careful to keep it controlled and safe. The woman watched, intrigued by his skill and the way he seemed to make the wilderness feel like home. That night, as they sat by the fire, the woman shared even more of her story. She spoke of her dreams, the simple joys of her life before captivity, and the hope she still held for the future. John listened, encouraging her to speak, providing a safe space where her voice could be heard without fear of judgment or harm. Each word she spoke was a step toward healing, a way to reclaim her identity and sense of self. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, shared experience, and the simple act of caring for one another in a harsh and unforgiving world. The desert night was quiet and still, the stars twinkling above like distant beacons of hope. The woman felt a growing sense of security in John's presence, a comfort she had not felt since before her capture. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she could relax, even if only slightly. John kept watch, alert and vigilant, knowing that danger could still exist in the desert, but also recognizing the importance of allowing her to rest and regain strength. The night passed peacefully, and by morning both of them were ready to continue their journey towards safety, hope, and a new beginning. The town was small but welcoming, a cluster of buildings surrounded by the open desert. John led the Apache woman carefully through the dusty streets, making sure she did not stumble on the uneven ground. She walked slowly, leaning on him when necessary, but each step was a step toward safety, toward a place where her suffering could begin to heal. The town's residents glanced curiously at the pair, but none approached immediately. There was a quiet respect in the air, a sense that something serious had happened, and that this woman had endured hardship beyond ordinary understanding. John guided her to the local clinic first. The small building smelled faintly of medicine and disinfectant, but the atmosphere was warm, friendly, and calm. A nurse noticed their arrival and immediately approached, concern evident on her face. John explained what had happened, speaking calmly and clearly, making sure the woman was comfortable with every word. The nurse nodded and led her inside, offering gentle encouragement. The Apache woman allowed herself to be guided, her trust in John extending now to the strangers in the room. The staff quickly examined her injuries, cleaning her cuts and treating her bruised wrists with careful attention. John stayed nearby, his presence a steady reassurance as the nurse worked diligently. While the medical staff attended to her physical injuries, John spoke quietly with her, letting her rest and regain her strength. She had been through a traumatic experience, and though her body needed healing, her mind needed care just as much. John listened patiently as she told him more about her family and her community, the people she had left behind, and the traditions that had shaped her life. Her voice was still soft, but it carried a quiet strength. She spoke not only of her pain, but of hope, the hope that she could survive, recover, and perhaps even find justice for what had been done to her. After she was tended to, John and the woman went to meet the local authorities. The sheriff was a calm and experienced man, and John explained the situation clearly. The woman, though nervous, was brave enough to recount the events that led to her capture. She spoke of the cruel stocks, the hours of suffering, and the fear she had felt. Her words were careful but truthful, and the sheriff listened with growing concern. He promised that an investigation would begin immediately, that the men responsible would be found, and that she would be protected throughout the process. Hearing this, the woman allowed herself a small sigh of relief. For the first time since her capture, she felt that justice might be possible. John remained a constant support, helping her navigate the town and its people. He introduced her to the doctor who would follow up on her injuries, ensuring that she had proper care for the days to come. He helped her secure food and a safe place to rest, making sure that she felt protected at every step. The Apache woman, who had once been trapped and voiceless, now had someone to speak for her when her strength wavered. John's steady presence reminded her that kindness could exist even in a world that sometimes seemed cruel and unfair. Over the next several days, the woman's condition improved significantly. Her bruises faded slightly, her cuts healed, and the swelling in her wrists decreased. But the true progress was emotional. She began to speak more freely, sharing her fears, her dreams, and the details of her life before captivity. John listened patiently, never rushing her, allowing her to process her experiences at her own pace. He encouraged her to take small walks, to feel the sun on her face and the wind on her skin, helping her regain a sense of control over her body and her surroundings. Each step she took without fear was a victory, a small sign that her spirit was slowly returning. During this time, John also helped the authorities gather more information about the men who had captured her. He accompanied her when needed, offering support and guidance while respecting her pace and comfort. The sheriff and his team were methodical, asking questions and documenting the events carefully. They listened to the woman's account with respect, ensuring that her story was heard and taken seriously. The process was slow, but it was important. John understood that justice could not be rushed, and he remained patient, knowing that each detail contributed to a stronger case and the possibility of bringing her captors to account. The bond between John and the woman deepened with each passing day. She began to trust him not only as a protector but as a friend. They shared simple moments together, sitting quietly by a window watching the sun set, discussing the desert and the ranch, and even laughing softly at small stories John told about life on his land. These moments, though small, were crucial. They reminded the woman that there was life beyond fear and suffering, that there were people who cared, and that she could begin to reclaim her identity and her joy. One afternoon, the woman asked John if she could visit a nearby park. The request was small, but it marked a significant step in her recovery. She wanted to see trees, flowers, and open spaces, reminders of the world beyond confinement and cruelty. John agreed, and together they walked to the park, taking their time to move slowly and carefully. She looked around with wonder, observing the colors, smells, and sounds of a life she had almost forgotten. The simple pleasure of watching birds and feeling grass beneath her feet brought tears to her eyes, tears not of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. John smiled quietly, knowing that this small freedom was part of her healing. As the investigation progressed, the woman's confidence grew. She spoke more openly to the authorities, providing details that helped them identify the men responsible for her suffering. John remained a quiet support, never pressuring her, but always ready to offer encouragement when fear or doubt crept in. Her courage was remarkable, her determination to see justice done, a testament to the strength that had carried her through the desert, through captivity, and now through recovery. Evenings in the town became a time for reflection and quiet bonding. John and the woman would sit together, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. She would talk about her hopes for the future, her desire to return to her community, and her dream of helping others who might be in danger. John listened, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply listening, always respecting her wishes. Their conversations were not just about survival or recovery. They were about life, trust, and the small joys that made living worthwhile. Through it all, the woman began to see that the world could be kind, that people could act with courage and compassion, and that even in the face of cruelty, there was hope. John had become more than a helper. He had become a symbol of safety, resilience, and human kindness. She realized that the bond they shared was built not on fear or pity, but on mutual respect and understanding. Each day brought new strength, new trust, and a deeper sense of hope for the future. As the days turned into weeks, the woman began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. She attended follow-up medical appointments, participated in interviews with the authorities, and slowly regained her physical strength. John continued to support her, offering encouragement, practical help, and companionship. The desert, once a place of fear and suffering, had been transformed into a backdrop for recovery, resilience, and human connection. Through his care, she learned that she could face the challenges ahead, that her courage and spirit were stronger than the cruelty she had endured, and that justice was within reach. One evening, after a long day, the woman looked at John and smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it carried immense meaning. She had survived, she was healing, and she had found someone who truly cared for her well-being. John nodded, feeling a sense of fulfillment and pride in her progress. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. Both of them had been changed by the experience, she by his unwavering support, and he by witnessing her courage and resilience. The bond between them had grown into something enduring, a connection that could weather the trials of the past and the uncertainties of the future. That night, the woman lay in a bed provided by the local authorities, feeling safer than she had in a long time. Her body was still healing, her mind still processing the trauma, but she felt hope. Hope that she would see her family again, that the men responsible for her suffering would be brought to justice, and that she could reclaim her life. John sat nearby, keeping watch, as he had done from the moment he found her in the cruel stocks. The desert and the world beyond were no longer places of fear for her, thanks to the compassion, patience, and courage of one man who had heard her cry and chosen to act. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the desert and the soft warmth of sunlight spilling. Over the hills, the Apache woman woke feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Her body was still tender from the hardships she had endured, but the pain no longer felt overwhelming. She had spent countless hours resting, walking carefully and receiving medical care, and now she could feel the slow return of strength in her muscles and joints. Most importantly, her mind felt freer. She no longer lived in constant fear. John had helped her reclaim something she thought she had lost forever, a sense of safety, trust, and hope. After a simple breakfast prepared by the local authorities, she and John walked outside to take in the morning light. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and rugged, but now it did not feel threatening. The warm colors of dawn painted the hills in gentle shades, and the wind whispered softly through the sparse trees. The woman took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. She felt alive in a way she had not for a long time, and the simple act of walking beside John, who had been her unwavering support, was a reminder that she could move forward into a new chapter of her life. John suggested they visit the edge of the town, where the small community often gathered in the mornings. It was a quiet area, with a few benches and open space for people to rest or watch the sunrise. As they walked, the woman noticed small details she had missed before: the chirping of birds, the gentle sway of desert plants, the distant laughter of children playing. These ordinary sights, which she might have taken for granted before, now seemed extraordinary to her. She realized that life in its simplest form was beautiful and full of possibility, and that she could still be part of it. The journey through the town was quiet and calm. People nodded politely as they passed, sensing the importance of what had happened without needing to know the full details. John led her to a small bench under a tree where they could sit and rest. She looked around, observing the people going about their daily lives. The sight brought a strange comfort. She realized that the world was not entirely cruel. There were places where she could belong, places where people would listen, care, and help her recover. Over the next few days, the Apache woman began to regain more independence. She was able to move without John's constant support, though he remained close, offering guidance and reassurance whenever necessary. She visited the clinic for follow-up care and found herself gradually able to speak more openly with the medical staff. Each small achievement was a reminder of her strength and resilience. She had endured unimaginable hardship, but she had survived, and now she had the power to rebuild her life. The investigation into her capture continued. John accompanied her when needed, helping her feel safe as she recounted details to the authorities. The sheriff and his team worked diligently, and their determination gave her hope that the men responsible for her suffering would be found and held accountable. This sense of justice, combined with her growing strength, helped her regain confidence in herself and the world around her. She realized that although the past could not be erased, she had the power to shape her future. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet companionship. John and the woman would sit together, often at the edge of town or on the ranch where he had first found her. They would watch the sun dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and gold. These moments were simple yet profound. They offered peace, reassurance, and a sense of continuity in a world that had once seemed unstable and threatening. The woman began to find joy in these quiet times, realizing that healing was not just about recovery from injury, but also about regaining the ability to appreciate life's small pleasures. She began to speak more openly about her dreams. She wanted to return to her community, to be with her family, and to share her experiences so that others could learn from them. She spoke of teaching younger members of her community about resilience, survival, and the importance of helping one another. Each dream she expressed was a step toward reclaiming her life, a declaration that she would not be defined by the cruelty she had endured. John listened with pride, offering encouragement and insight when appropriate, but always respecting her autonomy and her wishes. The woman also began to take walks around the town on her own. She visited local shops, spoke with residents, and began to feel a part of the community. Each interaction, each small gesture of kindness from strangers helped her rebuild her confidence. She realized that while the desert had once been a place of fear, it was now a place of freedom and possibility. Her connection to the land, which had been a source of vulnerability during her capture, now became a source of strength. She understood that the lessons she had learned in the harshness of the desert, patience, awareness, resilience, were tools she could carry into her new life. One afternoon, she asked John if they could visit the ranch again, the place where he had first found her. Walking through the familiar landscape brought back memories of both fear and hope. She remembered the moment he had discovered her trapped in the stocks, the fear that had gripped her, and the relief she had felt when he freed her. Standing there now, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She realized that her survival was not just due to her own courage, but also because of the kindness and bravery of another human being. John had become more than a helper. He had become a friend, a protector, and a symbol of hope. The ranch, with its open fields and grazing cattle, became a place of learning and reflection. The woman observed John as he worked, noting the patience, dedication, and care he showed for every living creature. She found inspiration in his example, realizing that the same qualities of kindness and perseverance that had helped her survive could also guide her in rebuilding her own life. She began to feel empowered, understanding that her past suffering did not define her, but rather her strength in overcoming it did. As the days passed, the woman grew more independent, more confident, and more connected to both the land and the people around her. She began to teach others about resilience and survival, sharing her story to help those who might face difficulties of their own. Her experiences, once a source of fear and pain, had become a source of wisdom and inspiration. She realized that even in the darkest moments, there was the possibility of light, and that the kindness of one person could spark hope and courage in another. One evening, as the sun set and the desert sky turned shades of purple and gold, the woman and John stood together on a hill overlooking the ranch. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. She took a deep breath, feeling the freedom and strength that had been hard-won through months of fear, struggle, and healing. She looked at John and smiled, a smile full of gratitude, hope, and determination. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace, ready to face the future with courage and resilience. The bond between them had grown into something enduring. John had not only helped her survive, but had also shown her the power of kindness, patience, and human connection. The woman realized that life, though unpredictable and sometimes cruel, also contained moments of profound goodness and love. She had been trapped in cruel stocks, left to suffer alone, but through courage, resilience, and the support of another human being, she had found freedom, safety, and a renewed sense of purpose. Her future now seemed full of possibility. She planned to return to her community, to reunite with her family, and to continue teaching others the lessons she had learned. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. The experience had changed her, shaped her, and made her wiser. Yet, it had also shown her the value of trust, friendship, and compassion. John had been a guiding light in her darkest hours, and she would carry the lessons he taught her for the rest of her life. As night fell over the desert, the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, reflecting in the woman's eyes. She stood tall, her spirit unbroken, her heart filled with gratitude and hope. The rancher by her side smiled quietly, proud of her progress and the courage she had shown. The desert, once a place of fear and suffering, now felt like a home where resilience, healing, and human kindness could thrive. Together, they had turned a story of cruelty into a story of survival, trust, and the enduring power of compassion. And in that quiet desert night, with the cool breeze brushing their faces, the Apache woman knew she had truly found a new beginning, a life of hope, strength, and the knowledge that even in the harshest circumstances, courage and kindness could lead to freedom and healing.